Here are 10 books that you need to read if you enjoyed the film that it was based on or inspired by. But before we begin, just to clarify, this is my list. And that means two things. Number one, if I haven't seen the film and read the book, I haven't included it on this list because I need to have watched and read them in order to compare them. This is not a definitive the book is better than the film kind of a list. This is just my list of books that I think you should check out if you enjoyed the film. And that does mean that a few potentially obvious ones are getting omitted here. Things like Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, which I haven't read, or Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. I love those films, I haven't read the books, so they're not on the list. Second, I have tried to omit any that seemed a little bit obvious, like The Hunger Games. People love the Hunger Games films and the books. I like the films and the books, but most people know the Hunger Games films are based on books, so it feels kind of pointless to talk about it. Another example might be Perks of Being a Wallflower. Great book, great film. I enjoy them both, most people enjoy them both, and I actually think they're of very equal quality. Therefore, talking about them seems a bit pointless. The idea here is to have a few films that are all great, and people really enjoy them, and some of you might be surprised that they were based on books and that the books are worth checking out. Either because they do something very different to what the film did, or because in their own right, these books are fantastic works of literature. Wait, what? Me? Do I have a Patreon? Yes, actually, yes I do. Yeah, you can support me at patreon.com/WillowTalksBooks. I welcome it, actually. Go for it. I'd like to start off with one that's kind of interesting, at least to me. 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is interesting for two reasons, a personal one and a cultural, historical one. The cultural and historical reason that 2001 is an interesting choice is that the movie technically came first. Stanley Kubrick had the idea for 2001, and he reached out to celebrated science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke to put together the plot and actually make this story a reality. But Arthur C. Clarke also wanted to turn it into a novel that he could publish. So the film and the novel actually came out in the same year. It was originally Kubrick's idea, not Clarke's. So the film isn't technically based on the book. They are a rare example of something working in tandem. The personal reason that this is kind of interesting is that the novel 2001: A Space Odyssey was one of the first novels I ever read. I got into reading quite late in life, in my late teen years. I'd never seen the film, but people really love it, so I thought, okay, I'll read the book. I saw it in a bookshop, I picked it up, and I loved it. I absolutely adored 2001. To this day, it's still one of my favorite sci-fi novels. It really made an impact on me. I consider it a very important and pretty influential work of fiction in my life. So to this day, 2001 is a thing that I tell people to read a lot. If you've seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, which you probably have because most people have seen it, you'll love the book. The book explains away a lot of the surrealism and the vagueness of the film. Kubrick's film is pretty wordless, there's not a lot of dialogue in it, and the events of it are kind of up for interpretation. But the book spells all of that out a little bit more. Like, for example, early in the film, when these human ancestor ape things find I think it's called the obelisk, they start to change and behave differently. In the novel, it spells out what the obelisk did to their minds, what it instilled in them. It instilled in them the idea of jealousy, and how jealousy kind of fueled a jump in psychological evolution for humankind. It's dark and bleak and really, really interesting, and I appreciated it being spelled out more in the novel. But another interesting tidbit is that I only just watched the film. I am 33? 33, yeah. And I just watched 2001. I bought this copy very, very recently. I finally saw it, and it's real good. Next up is an obvious but very important one. The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. There is a case that could be made that the Lord of the Rings films by Peter Jackson are some of the greatest works of cinema of all time, full stop. They are remarkable movies in so many different ways. And everyone knows they're based on Tolkien's novels, or novel technically, but so many people don't read them. Because they're very, very long, they're very dry, they're old, and unless you're a die-hard fantasy fan, you might just go, I'll just watch the films. That's what I did. Until, again, very recently. While I was moving up here to Scotland, my partner and I listened to the Lord of the Rings audiobooks narrated by Andy Serkis on the drive back and forth from London to Glasgow, back and forth for hours and hours. So much time, so much money, so much Lord of the Rings. What's remarkable about the books is the amount of world building and plotting. Tolkien was creating an enormous mythology, an entirely fictional world that kind of mirrored the expansive world of Greek mythology and Norse mythology and other world mythologies. And he did it. But you feel all of that in Lord of the Rings. You feel it so much more than you do in the films. The films are epic in scope and scale, and the films are better than the book in so many ways. The characters are injected with so much more personality and humour. There are actual fight and action scenes. The books really don't have a lot of action at all. It is barely mentioned. Here was a fight ended, now let's move on. And the books, especially the second one, are full of so much walking around, just wandering and wandering. But it's the world building that's so much more impressive in Lord of the Rings, the novel. The way that Tolkien designed this place, its history, its culture, its art and music, it's really, really incredible stuff. And you appreciate it so much more in the novels. So if you've never read Lord of the Rings and you do love the films, I urge you to finally check the books out, as I finally have. Next up is something that I read and watched really recently, Poor Things by Alistair Gray. Poor Things is a fascinating novel, and Yorgos Lanthimos' film, I would argue, actually enhances the book in many ways. Fixes things that I didn't necessarily like, and generally lifts a lot of the tone and the themes and the character portrayals. I talked about all of that in another video that you can go watch, but I still urge you to read the book if you enjoyed the film. Poor Things, the movie, is a masterpiece, now one of my favourite films. But Alistair Gray's story is something entirely unique, and that's because of the way that it's framed. See, the film couldn't really do this, but the novel begins with a kind of research setting that establishes the idea, the fake idea, that Poor Things was a piece of autofiction written by and about a real doctor that existed in Victorian Glasgow. He wrote the book about his life, he self-published a single copy, and it gets found in the 20th century. Alistair Gray frames himself as an editor of that book, piecing it back together and getting it ready for redistribution. He even describes himself in a very pathetic and sad way in a little author bio at the beginning. Then we get the main narrative that the film adapts really well and enhances, as I said. And then at the end, for the final 50 pages of this book, we get a letter from the protagonist's wife, addressed to anyone who reads it, saying that everything you just read was a lie. We're told that the letter exists at the beginning, so I'm not spoiling this. We know the letter is there, and we know what it says. And then after the narrative, you read the details of the letter, where she says that none of this was true, her husband had flights of fancy, don't believe it, she's ashamed of it, but she knows it's out there. It's an ending that a lot of people don't seem to like. I laughed at it, while also feeling kind of sad. But it's a wonderfully feminist move where it gives our female character a lot more agency. It reinforces the agency that she has and her right to choose, and her right to stand up for herself and make her own arguments, especially against a story that was written about her. The film course corrects all of this by making Bella our point of view character, making her the centre of the story, and giving her a little bit more agency in the events of the main narrative. But the book tackles all of that by giving her a letter at the end. It's an interesting choice. The book is fantastic. It's also full of illustrations that Gray did himself because he was also an artist. And even just for that, it's worth reading. I love Poor Things, I love the book and the film, and if you enjoyed the film, you need to read the book. Another novel that you need to read for the exact same reason that you should read The Lord of the Rings is Dune by Frank Herbert. Now, I've never seen the original film adaptation of Dune, most people do not like it, but I have seen Denis Villeneuve's film, soon to be at the time of recording, 2 films. That movie blew me away, for so many reasons. It is one of the most gorgeous pieces of epic cinema I have ever seen. The costumes, the setting, the visuals, the performances, I could go on and on. The soundtrack is remarkable. No, I'm gonna stop. Denis Villeneuve's Dune is remarkable. A truly captivating work of cinema. And so is Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. But you should read The Lord of the Rings and you should read Dune, because Dune goes into so much more world building. I actually think that Denis Villeneuve's film did a great job of explaining pretty much everything, but the novel does a lot more. And for that reason, it's a little more dry. It is a long epic, it's quite slow, and a fault with it is that Dune can feel at once patronising and confusing. That's kind of the tone that Herbert presents, at least in my opinion. But Dune is something very, very, very special. It is smarter than I am. I read Dune once, I want to reread it, and there are so many philosophical arguments presented that went over my head. The way in which it feels kind of patriarchal at first, until you watch a bunch of video essays by people much smarter than me who explain that in fact it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, and it's kind of reverse engineering the idea of patriarchy. All of that was stuff that just went over my head when I read it. Which is why it's worth reading, to try and deal with all of that, to tackle all of that head on, to read something that might be smarter than you are and try and meet it head on and overcome it. That's why I want to revisit Dune. But when we think space opera, when we think grandiose, intelligent science fiction, we think Frank Herbert's Dune. And you need to read it if you haven't. One for the kids is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Diana Wynne Jones was a Welsh author of children's fiction. A certain bigoted billionaire lifted a lot from her works, and the two most accomplished things that Jones ever wrote were Howl's Moving Castle and the Chrestomanci series, which begin with the book A Charmed Life. As you probably know, Howl's Moving Castle was a Studio Ghibli film directed by Hayao Miyazaki. It's a remarkable film. It's a lot of people's favourite animated film, favourite Ghibli film, etc. And Miyazaki visited Jones. The two of them discussed the film as it was being made. She had a hand in it, at least as far as I understand. But her novel is still remarkable, and there are a lot of differences between the two. Miyazaki is a genius. You can't get around that, and you shouldn't have to. And so I do think that he did the novel justice. He truly did. It is an incredible work of fiction. But I do think a lot of people aren't aware that Howl's Moving Castle was in fact a novel written by an amazing Welsh woman. If you didn't know that, go read it, go check it out. If you love children's fiction, and you want a children's novel that doesn't patronize kids, a novel that's full of emotional complexity and difficult characters, then you definitely need to read all of her works. In fact, A Charmed Life is populated by difficult children, kids that are unlikable, unruly. Her fiction was not sanitized, it was complex. She respected the minds of children. She understood that kids were clever and could deal with complex emotional things. And so she put all of that in her books and knew that kids would enjoy them. I respect her respect of children. For that reason, everyone should read Diana Wynne Jones, no matter how old they are. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit of a rant. I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. The film, directed by someone, I don't know who, and starring Will Smith, is rubbish. When the film came out, I was in school, I think, and everyone just talked about the fact that there's a sad scene with a dog, and then that's kind of it. Will Smith is bland in it, the whole film is meh, but it left quite a cultural impact when it came out. People talked about it for a long time. People still talk about I Am Legend. Richard Matheson's novel is incredible. It is a remarkable piece of post-apocalyptic science fiction horror. It's amazing. I love I Am Legend. When I read the book at university, I was stunned by how different it is from the film and how much smarter it is and more accomplished. I Am Legend is great. If you said to someone on the street, hey, I love I Am Legend, they'd be like, what, that very average, very mid film? Because the film, sadly, despite how mid or even bad it is, has had a larger cultural impact than the novel that it was based on. Matheson's book is so good. It also explains the name I Am Legend. It's about a guy who is, as far as he knows, the last remaining human, at least in Los Angeles, where the book is set. I think it's LA. It's been years, I'm sure it's LA. Anyway, everyone else has contracted the vampire curse. People are turning into vampires, and he sits in his house, he boards up his windows, he stakes his claim, and he hunts, and he defends himself against the vampire horde, which is now all of society. It's an amazing novel. I love I Am Legend. I need to reread it. It's not long, it's a pretty short novel. I read it really quickly, and again, it was one of the first books I ever read. Looking back, I feel like I was reading a lot of books that had films based off of them, that were good or bad, or I hadn't seen them, and maybe when I was an early reader, that gave me some sort of an anchor. I also remember when I was at university, I read Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Same thing applies there. I guess that's how I approached books. I never even realized I did that. Anyway, my voice is suddenly going, so let's crack on. Misery by Stephen King. I actually have a video about Misery. I made that video a few years ago. It might not be good now, I can't remember. Misery is a bit of a weird choice. I think a lot of people know that the film is based on a book. But what's important here is that both of them are really, really good, but they are slightly different. There's something about Stephen King's writing that gets adapted a lot into film, but the films never quite feel like the books, and so the books always remain something worth reading. Rob Reiner's 1990 film, starring Kathy Bates, who won an Oscar for an incredible performance, and she is one of my favourite people in the whole wide world. I would die for her. I love you, Kathy Bates. It's great. It's an amazing film. It is claustrophobic and unsettling and upsetting. It's truly chilling and amazing, and Kathy Bates is perfect. But King's novel focuses more on the psychology of the whole thing. Rather than creating a unique monster, the novel feels claustrophobic in a double-layered kind of way, where you're in this cabin, our protagonist is broken and unable to leave, he is caged in, but he's also locked inside his mind. He's thinking about his past, his future, his regrets, he's an arrogant asshole, he's very unlikable, and so you kind of feel trapped in his head, trapped in the psychology of his unlovable mind. And that adds an extra layer of fear, frustration, claustrophobia, that the film simply cannot convey. Because film is a visual medium and we spend this whole time outside of his head, in his room, in this house, fearing this monstrous woman played by an amazing Kathy Bates. I love you so much, by the way. But the book has this double-layered claustrophobia that's very addictive, very Moorish, and yet you don't want to carry on. You're afraid to carry on. You have to. You need to know what happens. It is torturous. You're locked into it. You don't like it, but you need it. That's the effect that Misery, the novel, has. And so if you love the film and you've never read the book, it is a very unique reading experience that I really, really enjoyed. It's one of my favorite Stephen King novels easily. This one feels a little bit like cheating, because it's a really easy one. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. I reread this recently. I did a video on it that you can go watch. Hitchhikers is an obvious choice because the film isn't very good. Even though it stars Sam Rockwell, one of the most underrated, incredible, amazing actors that the modern US has ever spat out. I love Sam Rockwell. He's so underrated. Watch Moon. Moon was also directed by Duncan Jones, who is David Bowie's son, and it has one of the best soundtracks ever. It's an amazing sci-fi film. Sam Rockwell's incredible. He was also the only good thing about Iron Man 2. I love that guy. And he plays Zaphod Beeblebrox in the film, and the film is bad. Martin Freeman sucks. He's an asshole. I don't like him. Anyway, I don't know who directed it. Alan Rickman as Marvin was a very, very good choice. And so when I read the book, I do hear Alan Rickman's voice, which is great, RIP. What was the point I was trying to make? The book is better. Right, the book is amazing. The book was also a radio drama that I have never listened to and I really should. I think there was also a TV show before my time, blah, blah, blah. I should check all of that out. But the novel remains one of the greatest pieces of satire, comedy, and science fiction ever made. I don't think I need to belabor that point. You can go watch my recent video on it if you'd like. Most people have read the book rather than seen the very mid-film, so this is a bit of a cheat one, but I needed a reason to reiterate that The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is one of the greatest novels ever written. It changed everything for so many reasons. Go watch my video on it. I love that novel to pieces. No Country for Old Men. I'm not sure how many people know that this film is based on a novel. Maybe it's very common knowledge, I'm not sure, but in case it isn't, you really should read it. Now this is a really man story, a really, really blokey book and film, but I still love it. In fact, I love everything that Cormac McCarthy ever wrote. I have read most of his books, and I never talk about that. I never talk on this channel about how much of a fan I am of Cormac McCarthy, but I am. And I read No Country for Old Men years before I saw the film. Now, the Coen brothers movie is incredible. Javier Bardem, Tommy Lee Jones, these actors are remarkable in this film. Bardem especially is amazing in it. He's always amazing, but this film really put him on the map, and he really is great. But nothing reads like a Cormac McCarthy novel. Nothing in the world. He had a way of writing where he forewent, I want to say forewent. You can say forego, but can you say forewent? I'm going to say it. He forewent punctuation. That was a big thing that he always did. And it creates this stream of consciousness flow to everything he writes. It makes his books very addictive and very easy to get through. They flow beautifully. And in the case of The Road, that's not necessarily a good thing, because that's one of the most upsetting, traumatizing, and difficult novels you'll ever read, but it is a masterpiece. And so is No Country for Old Men. I think for anyone who is a fan of that really, really good film, they have a wonderful reason to go check out a brilliant, brilliant novel, which as far as I can tell is slightly ignored by the fan base of the film. But I'm not entirely sure. I'm not in everyone's heads and I don't know the zeitgeist, but if you didn't know that No Country for Old Men was a novel by Cormac McCarthy, go read it. You really should. Then we have His Dark Materials / Northern Lights / The Golden Compass. His Dark Materials is the whole trilogy. In the UK, the first book is called Northern Lights, and in the US, it's called The Golden Compass. The film is also called The Golden Compass, and the TV series is called His Dark Materials. So in terms of numbers, the name Northern Lights is kind of losing the battle. If you saw the film, you know it wasn't very good. Despite the fact that it had a star-studded cast and it looked gorgeous, it was a case of watering down themes and ideas. Philip Pullman's novel is a very complex thing. I've talked about it in a video. This was the book that turned me into a bookworm. It was the first novel that I ever read for pleasure. I was like 15 years old, and it changed my life. It's also a very anti-religious story, but in a more complex way than just berating the church, though it does do that. The film filtered all of that out. It is thematically bland, thematically void. It is an uninteresting adventure. An adventure that looks really pretty and again has a star-studded cast, but that's it. The TV show did a much, much better job of adapting it, although I never saw the third season, just the first two. They came out, I think, during lockdown. I watched them and then I forgot to watch the third. I can't remember the name of the girl who was in Logan, who is a bilingual actor between Spanish and English. I can't remember her name, but she's amazing. She was great in Logan, and she's great in His Dark Materials, so definitely go watch the TV series. She's brilliant. Like, I have a very clear idea of who Lyra is in my head because I read this book as a teenager, and she meant a lot to me. She helped my trans egg crack for sure. And although I can't remember the actress, she really did Lyra justice. She felt like my Lyra, and that's awesome. So go watch the show. Don't watch the film. But if you have seen the film and you haven't read the book, read the book, because all of the pro-science, pro-humanity, anti-religious themes of it that are explored in such a complex, dense and multi-layered, multifaceted way, a very sympathetic way, they're all in here and they were removed from that film. So please read this. And finally we have Annihilation, and I kind of just want to tell a weird story about this book. See, the film adaptation of Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer is really, really good. It was directed by Alex Garland, but a fun fact about Alex Garland is that he was originally a novelist, and he wrote The Beach. The Beach was adapted to film by Danny Boyle, a very good filmmaker. The film starred Leo DiCaprio, and it was really good, and it was far more famous than the book. Alex Garland then put his pen down, picked up a camera, and became a director himself. He made Ex Machina, which is really good, and he made Annihilation. He then made Men, a film that should be really good, but I really didn't enjoy it. I love the weirdness of it. I love the trippy creepiness of it. I thought it was a very daring film, not just in its themes and ideas, but also in the way that it was shot and cast and expressed tonally. But I felt that it was very derivative and it belabored its point too much. I should have liked Men and I didn't. But isn't it weird that Alex Garland wrote books that were adapted to film and then decided to make films that adapted from novels, like Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer? The Annihilation film is great. I really, really enjoyed it. But I read the book afterwards and it added so much more to my experience. I'm so glad that I picked up the book. The book is also the first in a trilogy that I haven't read yet, and I'm eager to read more Jeff Vandermeer stuff. The guy's approach to weird science fiction and eco-fiction is remarkable and completely unique. It is a weird case where I'm not sure that the book expands much on what the film lays out because it is quite cryptic and strange and up for interpretation. But the book does have a more satisfying and clear ending than the film does, in my opinion. I can't remember what it was now, but the film changed something in the ending that annoyed me. And that in itself makes the book worth reading, but there's nothing quite like it. This is a very, very unique novel that absolutely needs your attention. Annihilation is very much its own thing. The film was great. The book, I think, is even better and really, really needs attention. Even though everyone loves Vandermeer, he's very famous, but still, go read it if you haven't. There you go. You should support me on Patreon. Subscribe for books.